Hi, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Heidi Rader, Marisa McKasson. We're going to talk about the Tribes Extension Program, so along with some other folks in the audience.
Yeah, so first we just wanted to share that we have other Tribes Extension folks in the audience, so they're going to come up and make guest appearances throughout the presentation. So we can go back to this for contact information afterwards if you need it, and we'll have some general information. I'm gonna go ahead and let Heidi kick it off.
Okay, sure. So we'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered on the Alutiiq Sugpiaq homeland. We thank and acknowledge the 10 tribes of the Kodiak Alutiiq region, and I work on the traditional lands of the Dana people in Fairbanks. So,
yeah, and I work on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina people in Anchorage. So.
Okay, so I guess I'll be on this video for this part. This is the Zoom video spot over here. So anybody familiar with Cooperative Extension Service? Great. So we do a lot of different things focused on outreach. Our program specifically works directly with tribes now throughout the state. I've worked for a number of years doing this type of work, focused primarily in the interior region, in the Tanana Chiefs Conference region, which is 37 tribes. And now we've expanded our work to all 229 tribes in Alaska that we can reach. So with Extension, we've got publications, hands-on workshops, webinars, YouTube videos. So we also connect people with our other experts that are within Extension, and one of our main goals is to share our research-based information out with others. So you can always rely on Extension information. We update it regularly. It's peer-reviewed. And another really nice thing is if you ever look up a recipe online and you get a zillion ads, all of our stuff is ad-free. So I think that's really nice as well. So, some other team members here. We've got Emily at the conference, not here. Molly Caradwin. We do contract with traditional knowledge holders, or when we go out to a community, ask if there are traditional knowledge holders that can present with us. So Molly Caradwin is one who's traveled a lot with us, as well as done YouTube videos and webinars with our partner Rural Cap. So you'll hear more about Iva. Iva is here with Rural Cap, and they provide an awesome newsletter every month, as well as a webinar series and an experiential learning course that you'll hear more about in a little bit. Anya is up in Fairbanks, and she is also traveling and doing a lot of workshops, and Jasmine in Sitka. So just team members working to get out into the villages with workshops or information or technical assistance. So, and as you can see, we have a lot of different funders, primarily grant funding, but we also have tribal partnerships with the Aleutian Pribilof Island region, where Marisa is based. I don't know if you're going to talk more about that later, so we'll save on that. I, for many years, was based at Tanana Chiefs Conference, and that is the model of the federally recognized Tribes Extension Program, where you actually have an extension agent located on a reservation in the lower 48, and here up in Alaska, the model has been with a tribal consortium. We also have a program out in Bristol Bay with Deanna Bear, who does 4-H in partnership with the Bristol Bay Native Association. So her focus is on 4-H, and ours is mostly on food and food sovereignty. So yeah, the gist of our program overall is to support food sovereign tribes, healthy, thriving tribes through food. And so, sometimes the options are limited in communities, especially where I work in the Tanana Chiefs Conference region. Some communities don't have stores, but a lot of what you see in the stores is highly processed food that keeps for a long time. So we're working to support whatever other ways there are to provide other options. So this is just Galena. This is a basic potato garden. And, you know, he's a big fisherman, so he's not paying too much attention to his potatoes, but whatever efforts we can support that work for people is what we do. So along those lines of small gardens, you know, I think it's amazing what you guys are doing in Kodiak with the farm, the tribally owned farms, and we have smaller community gardens sometimes, but one of the programs I have is to send out seeds to the tribes, and then they distribute those to their gardeners. And so community gardens and tribal farms can be a lot of organizational work, finding someone to work in those gardens when everybody wants to be gone, traveling, fishing, hunting, or traveling for work or working. And so I do just support individual gardeners too. So we sent out seeds for over 500 gardeners in 25 different communities this spring. So, and actually, I'll go back to that slide. This is just kind of this is like how I like to think about food is as, you know, it's just the calorie. I think USDA, which funds a lot of our work, tends to think of the caloric value primarily of food, but I just like to share this pyramid by Jared Queston William. And there's so much more that goes, as you all know, that goes into getting the food, whether it's growing or gathering or fishing for it, all those memories you're making. You've got physical activity, you're often out with your family. So there's so much other value in securing those wild foods or growing it compared with purchasing it and buying it from the store. So it's kind of what that shows.
Yeah, like I think we've heard a lot about farming to over this conference, and at the Tribes Extension program, we think harvesting your own fish, picking your berries, like that's all farming as well. And so we really like to incorporate those ideas into whether it's growing potatoes and carrots so that you can put them in a soup with your salmon, or in my region, seal, etc. It's all connected in our eyes. So gardening and farming isn't separate from our traditional foodways; they kind of go together.
And that's a story that we tell to USDA as well, because in the language of grants, it often focuses on farming or ranching, and so we're always trying to push the limits of what that means in Alaska too. Stewarding wild berries, you know, like augmenting moose habitat like Tyonek does, improving fish habitat. Those could all be seen as farming, and it's not necessarily going to help you access a certain grant because it's geared towards something else, but some of them you can access those types of grants. Oh yeah. So
there
that's
you go.
this is also in Galena, lingonberries. So it's, yeah, we don't in any way want to promote gardening and farming and ranching over wild food, traditional food harvest. So, yeah, so this this photo over here on the left is some organic lettuce available at the grocery store, but here is some fresh lettuce. So, of course, all of the greens and lettuce is a low-hanging fruit to grow, an easy thing to do. And by the time it gets to many of the communities we work in, it is far, far, far from fresh, less healthier, and of course, trying to get kids to eat less fresh things is harder too. So there you. So you or me?
I think
are you
you
on?
finished this one.
Okay. Okay, so some of the things we go out and we do workshops on are things like growing food, preserving food, canning salmon, canning moose meat, making jam, all of those things. I went out to Arctic Village once and was up there for a culture camp, and an elder was growing a potato just in a small plastic salad container. And, I was like, oh, you should. And he asked me, if that was what he should do, basically. I was like, well, maybe try it in a larger bucket. And then I went back later that fall and his potato was looking great. And he was like, where do I harvest the potatoes? And, when do I harvest? And so it was new to him. They have a lot of permafrost up there. So it's pretty difficult, a very short growing season, and they don't have much of a tradition of gardening, although there are a couple up there. But yeah, he was super excited about his potato, and I showed him, that it would be in the soil, and that's some of the knowledge that we're able to share in some remote communities where they don't see other people gardening, so they don't see what grows there. And then yeah, so these are many of the topics we go out and share workshops on. I went to another community and she had made a bunch of jam for a potlatch, and she had pressure cooked all of her jam. And she said, I'm never making jam in my life again. I was like, oh, you hot water bath your jam. So yeah, for some people it's the first time they've ever done those type of activities. So that's good.
Yeah, so this is just kind of basically a summary of what we just talked about. So the goal of the Alaska Tribes Extension Program is to promote food sovereign and secure tribes in Alaska. We want to help tribes reach their goals around food sovereignty and security and help tribal communities with a variety of endeavors, anything from promoting community food security, resiliency, economic diversity of maybe trying new things that because of climate change you haven't tried before that you want to try, all while upholding that traditional knowledge and that commitment to those traditional foodways. And so just a summary that extension is this university-based resource that's like, okay, we're coming from what does kind of the university say is the most effective way to do something, and we're kind of extending that and saying, okay, in addition to that, like how can we make sure that all of the knowledge across the many different, whether it be home health and family development, energy, food, how can we make sure that gets out to tribes? And so we mostly focus on food. But just some of the ways we do that is, like Heidi was just saying, is in-person and Zoom workshops. We'll give a little more detail about what that looks like. But in addition to that, like extension agents are here so that anytime anyone has a question, like if that guy didn't have Heidi in his village to ask about the potato, he could have called her up on the phone and been like, I'm growing potatoes in a plastic salad container. Like, here's a picture. Why isn't it working? And it's our job to kind of help people along the way with any questions they have at any point in time. So I think sometimes it's really easy to get confused. Like, you go onto YouTube and you type in gardening and you're like, what the heck? Which video am I supposed to watch? And we're all Alaska focused knowledge, like one-on-one assistance, and we don't have the answers to everything, but usually we try our best to find the person that has the answer, even if we don't have it. So answering questions, anything is one of our big buckets. And then we try to create a lot of content and share resources. So Heidi's going to hand out some flyers that have a lot of QR codes and information to some of those, and we'll go a little bit more into them later. Yeah, or you're handing, and she's handing out a survey as well. And then technical assistance. So these are kind of the buckets that I'll provide a little bit more detail on as we keep going. And then this was just to emphasize that Heidi kind of started, like the Tribes Extension program started with the Tanana Chiefs Conference in Interior Alaska, but we're expanding. I specifically serve the tribes of the Aleutian and Pribilof Islands region, so there's never been an extension agent in the Aleutians before. And so my job specifically is to both support the statewide program, but also to support the Unanga people in what food projects are going to help them grow and be healthy and feed their families. So it's really exciting that now we're able to serve statewide. So this is a lot of text, but this is just an example of Heidi started to give examples of the type of workshops we can offer in person or via Zoom. And so here's just the long list. Anything from growing your own food if you're interested in wanting to do more organic gardening, so not using chemicals, growing herbs, pickling, canning red meat or fish. We try to offer a lot, and this is all available on our website. So I wanted to give Sarah a minute to talk about that. A big part of this, obviously, is we have a massive state, and with 229 tribes, we have to be a little bit creative in how we reach people. So I wanted Sarah, who is one of our Southeast agents, to talk about how she does Tribes Extension workshops.
Thank you. Yeah, it was wonderful when Heidi was able to extend the funding. I am not technically a tribes extension. I'm not associated with the tribe. I am a general agent for the Cooperative Extension for the Southeast District. And actually now it's sort of the South Coast, I guess, in a way, because I've included Kodiak and I've gone up to Cordova as well. But one of the things that I do, because travel is so expensive, and just getting to one community in Southeast could, if I have to go by ferry, could take a week or more because the ferries don't go very regularly anymore. There are few communities that I can go to just for the weekend. And flights are incredibly expensive. And of course, there's that whole weather thing that happens throughout Alaska that can cause problems. So what I started doing was, this is my boat right here. And this is Petersburg. I believe this is Petersburg. And I started traveling through Southeast, the Inside Passage. In Southeast, we have about 17 tribes. And then I added Cordova, the Eyak tribe, and then I've added the 10 tribes of Kodiak. I don't bring my boat over here. Not bringing my boat over here. Sorry. I'll be flying here. If someone has a boat here, maybe. But so we actually travel throughout Southeast on my boat, and I've actually been to all 17 tribes in Southeast. I've been to all but 2 of the Southeast communities, and that's more than 30, depending on whether you consider a community to be 10 people. I do. So I've been communities that are 10 to 20 people and done workshops with the entire community sometimes. But associating my work with the tribes in the communities and different communities, each community is very different in terms of what classes they're going to want to take. I also travel. I've traveled with other folks as well who come on the boat with me. So Jasmine Shaw, who you saw, who's in Sitka, she will come and do some of the more gardening and youth-based activities, and I'll focus on food preservation and food entrepreneurship. And I'm able to get to, 8 to 10 communities for the price of 2. 5 to 6 communities for the price of 1. Yeah, which is great. And I actually get to them all at once, and I get to be out in the Inside Passage all summer. It's fabulous. And when I'm in communities, I actually do gotta get around somehow. So that's my stuff.
All right. Sarah's an expert packer. I've learned a lot from her. And then, like we said, we like to partner with local culture bearers or knowledge holders when we're in any place. And so an example of this, like, for example, I'm going to Unalaska in a week and a half, hopefully, if Mount Spur doesn't erupt. And an example of a series of classes I'm going to be teaching is a gardening 101 and a seed starting. We're going to distribute some free seeds to the community members. We're going to be doing pressure canning, so teaching community members how to can fish. And then I'm going to be doing a pickles class. And so that's just an example of when we come. It's not like we just have to teach one thing. Like, I'm teaching after work every night of the week and gonna be teaching food preservation 101 on people's lunch. So I'm hoping to be able to reach a lot of people. And then I'm hoping that a local traditional knowledge holder is going to be able to join me in some of those classes and kind of give her perspective as well. So it's not just coming from the university, but also making sure. So I think Heidi talked about Galena already, but this is an example of teaching fish cutting in Galena. And yeah, so like I said, it can be a combination. And this is an example of a combination of both Molly Serwin, who's a Yupik traditional healer, with Leslie Jones, who's a nutrition educator through UAF. And this was actually a YouTube class or webinar that went on YouTube. And so we can do in person, we can do online. We try to be flexible to reach as many people as possible. And then if you have creative ideas, we're flexible to do different things. So this is most of what we've done so far, but if you think of a way that you think will get knowledge out there, we're happy to try it. And then we should have the resource sheets going out at some point, but there will be a QR code to our website. And then it's super simple to go on our website, and there's a big button that says request a workshop here. And so you can go ahead and use that and request a workshop for whenever works for your community.
And I was just going to explain that what I handed out too. We collect demographic data. If you're willing to do that, you can just leave the completed survey up here. We're also doing a larger survey for anybody who has already participated in webinars or newsletters. And there will be a drawing and also a follow-up survey if you're interested as well, that we will compensate people for their time. So
yeah, and then I wanted to invite Iva up here to talk a little bit more about the experiential learning class that she's going to be helping with in Metlakatla this summer. So
where's the camera? Okay, cool. Okay. Hi, I'm Iva. I work with Rural CAP. That stands for Rural Alaska Community Action Program. And the mission of Rural CAP is to improve the quality of life for low-income Alaskans. The program that I work for in Rural CAP is called Grow, and our goal is to improve food security for low-income Alaskans, mostly in rural communities, by helping with the local production of food. And so we have a few different ways that we're trying to do that. And one of the ways is through our partnership with the Tribes Extension, and kind of like providing some more outreach to try to spread the word, bring people into the fold through a newsletter and webinars. So if you sign up for the newsletter, we won't spam you. There's a lot of great information in there. It's just once a month for the most part, and you can always unsubscribe. And like something you'll hear about are like training opportunities, such as this course that this will be the third time that we're co-hosting it along with the tribe in Metlakatla. We've been working with the community garden champion there, Get a Hike, and we are planning. I think there's going to be a QR code on one
there
of
was
these.
supposed to be, but the new slides didn't load. So
Oh shoot!
we'll put it up
Okay.
afterwards.
Sorry guys. But it is, if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get a link to it. And we have funding to pay for people's travel. This summer it's going to be in the end of June in Metlakatla, and anyone, like, if you're interested, just apply, but our preference will be given to people who are growing food for rural Alaska Native communities. And yeah, it's going to be like gardening, also foraging. I did some low tide foraging, and we planned the dates around the low tides, so we're gonna do that again this year. Super fun. Yeah, that is actually an octopus. Yeah. Yeah, and then Sarah like teaches you how to preserve it, you know. And yeah, that's us having a great time mixing some shredded paper in with some compost. Yeah, lots of good times. And it's very like cozy classroom experience. People, I think it, like, the best part of it is just the relationships that people build with each other. Just like spending 3 days together doing all these fun activities. It's like a kind of like a camp for adults who enjoy food. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, the newsletter will have information about that if anyone is interested. Or also you can email me if you have any questions. It's grow@ruralcap.org. Thanks.
Yeah, so I have 5 more minutes, so this is going to kind of be a crash course, but like I said, we have a whole paper that has QR codes to all of this. So you'll be able to go home with all the resources you need afterwards, but just emphasizing that in addition to these workshops and these in-person opportunities, we also just want to make sure people have relevant Alaskan knowledge for growing and food related activities. And so we have Cooperative Extension Service publications on anything from canning walrus to home energy use to soil fertility, composting with worms, anything you want. There's probably a researched publication on our website. And then in addition, Heidi runs an amazing blog that's all focused on Alaskan growing. And so she has tons of articles over the years. I don't know if you want to add anything on that, but yeah, tons of articles over the years. And it's all her mostly interviewing local Alaskan farmers, gardeners, family members, etc. And so I've found it really helpful to kind of get those stories and learn about gardening from the people that are doing it in our state. This is a list of the upcoming webinars that Iva was just talking about through that Grow series. And so this is actually the QR code to the newsletter, and I will double push for her that it's an amazing newsletter. It doesn't spam you. Everything in it is always useful. And so these are the upcoming webinars happening over the next few months. So vermicomposting, that's what I was saying with the composting with worms can be super cool. Wild urban harvest, respectful foraging, lots of fun stuff. Has everyone gotten that needs it? Yeah, great. Yeah, it's on there. We also have YouTube videos, and so there's a Cooking Alaska Gathered and Grown with Molly Saradwin, and then Heidi does everything, so also makes YouTube videos. So if you don't like reading blogs or publications, you can watch and see people's actual gardens. So there's YouTube videos as well. Here's an example of one of the YouTube videos. And then I wanted to make a quick plug that the last thing that we really are supposed to help with is technical assistance. And I want to emphasize that this is a really interesting time to be having this conference. And we acknowledge that a lot of people are either in the midst of losing funding, struggling to think where their next funding is going to come from. We're right there with you. It's not a nice time to be working in this field and figuring out what's going to come next. But we will do our best to kind of try to continue to find opportunities to help people feed themselves in Alaska. And so the newest grant opportunities are always going to be on our newsletter. I also wanted to plug the AFPC has the Food Systems Network Opportunities portal, and that's usually pretty up to date. There's a couple. I tried my hardest to find current grants right now, and like I said, it's not the best timing. So here's the few things that I know are open. I will plug that this one is super great, the NRCS Soil Health Grant through APU. If you can attach your project to improving soil, she said that basically she'll fund it, especially if you're coming from a tribal community. So I would look into that one. Rural Cap has ongoing small scale grants, and then the Native American Agriculture Fund, their annual grant process is open now through May 1. So just wanted to say we will continue to try to find opportunities. We stick with you. We're here even if you just want to vent. It's a hard time for funding. So yeah, how can we extend a bridge to your community? Please send us your ideas and feedback. Sign up for our newsletter. Like I said, call us on the phone, send us an email. We're here to help. So thank you, everyone. I think I finished right on time.
So that presenters before you, I work at the UAF Institute of Agriculture, Natural Resources and Extension. My role there is as a research professor, and I also have a partial extension appointment. Today I'm going to be talking to you about one of several projects that I work on. I will just preface, because I've found a few people have been confused. They're like, wait, you do what? And you also do that? And don't you do that? And yes, I'm grant funded, so I go where the grants go. Just to clear that up. So this particular project is a National Science Foundation funded Navigating the New Arctic project. We're funded for 5 years of research looking at the interactions between permafrost and agricultural activities, primarily in the Tanana Valley, so interior Alaska, although we do have a couple of sites in Bethel and one in Anaktuvuk Pass as well. And I just want to acknowledge my colleagues who were part of this work and helped with some of the visualizations or content in the slides as well. So a little bit about the why. So oftentimes, especially when I present in different parts of the state or maybe different areas nationally, people don't know what permafrost is or why it matters from the context of agriculture. So like I said, we're primarily looking in the interior region of the state. But the why is really a bigger systemic question or issue. Let's see, is this my pointer? Yeah. So again, this is climate modeling, and so climate modeling, it has degrees of error, but it's sort of a best guess based on the data that we have. So we anticipate, or other researchers anticipate, that actually the central U.S., the area where, the breadbasket of the United States, the Corn Belt, where a lot of our food currently comes from and a lot of export foods is grown, will be less amenable to agriculture in the future. And in fact, a lot of that area is going to move north into Canada and even some in Alaska. So that's the climate projection. And what that means is they're looking primarily at ambient air temperatures and, different like things like precipitation and things like that. What these models often don't take into account are like other geomorphological features like permafrost. And we have a lot of permafrost in Alaska, as do they in a lot of northern Canada in the boreal shield there. So that is the big why we're interested in this question. And similarly, we anticipate that the third National Climate Assessment in 2018 anticipated that here we would see like soil temperatures warming. So we already know that we're in a bit of a feedback cycle where soil temperatures are rising, we're getting more seasonal precipitation, and that means that this is causing a feedback cycle within permafrost ecosystems, and they are starting to thaw or degrade. All right, so our response as a research team, when we applied for this grant, there was a bunch of us kind of picking at this question a little bit from our own fields of discipline. And I'll try and point out some of my colleagues. Here's Toby Schwar. He's with the International Arctic Research Center. Ben Jones, he's with the Institute of Northern Engineering. So we have economists, we have social scientists, we have remote sensing specialists, we have permafrost geomorphologists, we have social scientists and food system folks like myself, and so there's a whole crew of about 12 of us soil scientists who are working on this project. But really the idea here is that the big context is climate change, and then land use changes, like I just prefaced in the last slide, agriculture also moving northward, and then the interaction of agriculture and permafrost together. So that's where our project is situated. So our field sites, like I mentioned, most of them are in the Tanana Valley, so this is the Fairbanks area, and I'll get to why we chose that area in just a moment. Anaktuvuk Pass is up in the Brooks Range, and then Bethel is out on the YK Delta. This is just the purple dots are a representation of our various farm sites. We started out with 14 farms. That was ambitious. And actually, we've dropped a couple largely because these farms have changed their model or structure or sold farms, things of that nature. So we are seeing some changes in our study sites, but we're still going. So in terms of the types of farms, we do have diversified vegetable farms, direct-to-consumer markets, peony farms. We started out with some livestock. We no longer have livestock represented in a farm, but we are still working with the Large Animal Research Center in Fairbanks. And then again, a mixture hay, diversified vegetable farms are all, so the point is there's a diversity of farming types and products that are being produced on the farms that we work with. All right, so who's familiar with permafrost? I'm just deciding Okay, pretty good. Yeah, we're mostly an Alaskan crew. I won't go into too much depth, but just to give people a sense, because I feel like even though we're from Alaska, what I'm finding through this project is people have a sense of what permafrost is, but maybe not like a deep understanding of the different sort of typology and why it matters for something like this project. I just want to point out the difference in colors here. So high ground ice content, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment. So you can see these areas of this yedema or high ground ice content. Moderate is the light blue. Notice how much of Alaska has that light blue or dark blue color. And then low is the light gray. So down here in Kodiak, Kodiak, there's no permafrost, but even in the Kenai Peninsula, a largely like mountainous slopes and high areas in south central Alaska, we still see some permafrost. So it matters for our state from an agricultural perspective because literally 90% of the state is underlain by permafrost of some kind. So what is permafrost? Just a quick definition, it's any material. So it isn't just soil, it could be a mixture of rocks and sand. I mean, it's any material, parent material that stays below freezing or 0 degrees C for at least 2 consecutive years. So we're in a stage of rapid permafrost change from in terms of like areas of typical or classic permafrost, but we also are seeing some areas where there's new permafrost forming. I am not the permafrost person, but that was something that I learned recently. It was interesting. 80% of Alaska, like I said, 80 to 90% of Alaska land area falls within the permafrost region. And I think this is just a helpful graphic. So in the last slide, I kind of showed you those light gray, dark blue. This is sort of another one of those images, but this like subsurface I think figure is kind of helpful. So in Anchorage, this like area of lighter blue, that's considered the sporadic zone. The middle of the state is considered the discontinuous. So you can see there's like bigger pockets, like more of these ice wedges, more ice-rich permafrost. This would be like ice poor. And then when you get up above the Brooks Range in this area, this is considered the continuous permafrost zone, meaning there is almost all of the subsurface land is frozen at some depth. There's pretty much permafrost everywhere. Okay, so permafrost types. I mentioned this and I'm going to go through it kind of quickly, but there's a few slides that relate back to this. So the things I want to point out is part of our project working with permafrost geomorphologists was to create this typology of permafrost. And so to help, this is largely part of our education outreach to help people understand, but there's this idea of ice poor permafrost where the little dots here might represent some ice, and like say the farmer has cleared the land or done some leveling. After a few years, you might see that active layer or the ice or the permafrost moving deeper and deeper down. So you have a larger and larger talc. And eventually, you're at many, many meters. And it really doesn't matter. You're no longer seeing that degradation that you might see if you move down the typology scale. So type 2, a little more, these might be more like ice lenses. So it might take longer for them to thaw. And it might be more years, and you might see more ground subsidence. So when I say subsidence, I literally just mean the ground changing elevation in one way or another. That we can talk more about that, but I have a lot to cover. So if there's questions, we can get to them. Type 3 is when you start to see what are called ice wedges. So ice wedges are a formation largely left over from the Pleistocene era, and it's considered ice-rich. So now this is sort of the ice poor, and now we're getting to the ice-rich area, and this means that there's like massive ground ice, and I have some pictures of this to help illustrate it. And then once these start thawing, you do get this feedback cycle where these depressions known as thermokarsts can start to form. As that ice wedge melts, then you have this like highly saturated soil and these ponds that form, and they really might take many, many years, and lots. Here you can see like the potential degradation or depressions that might form. Might take a lot longer for this to be farmable or considered arable land. And then getting into type 4, it's the same idea, much larger ground ice columns or wedges, and the idea being that these probably will never be usable or ideal for agricultural purposes, because really they really won't dry out. They will continue to be wet. They'll continue to have some element of water or highly saturated soil. So just again, keeping in mind what the ice poor and ice rich categories mean. All right, and this is just a quick countertop science, which I think is a really great way of illustrating what I just talked about. So just we'll watch this together for a moment. So these are 3 ice, so you know what you're looking at. There's soil cores, and one is from high ground ice content. So again, that's the ice rich or big ice wedges. And then you have moderate ground ice and then low ground ice. And just watch what happens when these thaw out over I believe this was a 36-hour period. It'll give you a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about that ground settling as the permafrost thaws. So which one do you want to grow crops in? All right. Okay, so again, yeah, low ground ice, ice poor. This might be like a little bit of ice or maybe more like a sandy material that the ice might thaw and drain. This might be like ice lenses or like, yeah, you might get some settling and some water. And then this is ice rich. And the idea is like that content is really saturated and like the water may never go anywhere because this really is not a draining material that underlays it. Okay, so now I'm going to get into our project a bit. So this is considered a transdisciplinary research. So the whole point of the Navigating the New Arctic projects was to create these transdisciplinary teams or these convergent research science teams to work with a different group of people than researchers might usually work with. Oftentimes the NNAs went to communities working with, researchers working with tribal communities to answer big questions or these sort of like systemic questions or what might be considered wicked problems in other cases like coastal erosion, things like that. In this case, we're working in permafrost agroecosystems, which is a fancy way of saying agricultural systems where permafrost is always already also present, excuse me. So some of the ways we are working with our farmer friends, collaborators to produce new knowledge and research questions. And I'm going to go through this kind of quick, but because there's a lot. And so this is also a really high level overview. But if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask me afterward. Especially, I'm not going to be sharing tons of data because we have collected a whole lot of data. And I didn't want to bore you. I wanted to show you pretty pictures. So permafrost studies, like I said, there's a few folks. This is Ben Jones and Misha Kazvinsky. Both are permafrost experts at University of Alaska Fairbanks, and this is Ben's daughter, who often accompanies us on a lot of the field research. So they do a lot of these COVAX flight drilling. So this is about 4 meters. And the idea is this is a kind of a quick and dirty like field assessment of whether or not there's permafrost and how deep down that is. They can also use this to verify transects with a ground penetrating radar. So here's an example of Misha drilling at one of our sites in the forest. And this might be a little bit hard to see because it's bright in here, but here's sort of the brown soil. And then you can see these white parts here where the arrows are pointing. This is ice. And so this is like what we see when we are drilling and ice comes up. We also use this same tool to plant sensors in the agricultural field at the Agriculture and Forestry Experiment Station where I conduct a lot of the field studies. Okay, and then when we want to scale up and look at larger ice cores or soil cores rather, we have hired a drilling rig like this to do much larger. You can see like you actually get a core out of that, so you can actually look at the soil structure, the parent material, you can see how deep the ice is. And this is also a way to identify whether or not you have like maybe an ice lens, which you might just see, you know, kind of this, you don't know if this is an ice wedge or an ice lens that you've run into here. This would very much be like, yeah, there's a wedge there. That is a significant amount of ice rich, as in 100% ice that has come up. So we've worked with a few farms and also a site on an FAA lease out in Bethel. And this is a way to just help us identify a representation of what some of the different farms in the Tanana Valley have in terms of ice underlaying their agricultural setting. Okay, another suite of research techniques and tools that we use in our research team is remote sensing. So remote sensing is basically anything that's using data that, you know, whether that be satellite data or drone data, anything that you're not, that you're collecting remotely or analyzing remotely. And so we use a few different things. We use LiDAR, which is what creates these imageries. It actually sends lasers down to bounce off of the ground at multiple different angles. And then when they return back to the satellite or drone in some cases, it can actually like tell you the distance from whatever the data collection object is. And so we get these really high detailed topographic maps. And you can actually take these like through trees. So this can tell you, for example, under a tree layer if you have these like ice wedge polygons. So this formation here tells us this is an ice-rich area and that all of this degradation or this microtopography that's formed, that there's ice-rich in there. And you can kind of see it at sort of a larger scale here. So this is a golf course in Fairbanks that was originally plowed to be a hay farm. And so after about 60 years, this is what we're talking about when we say we've hit this like threshold in this feedback cycle, where all of a sudden, the temperature is warmed to a degree, and these areas that have lost their vegetative cover or maybe have regrown vegetative cover, look at the pattern here, these are trees. Look at all these polygons. This is probably where they've continued to level because they want it to be a golf course, even though it really doesn't want to be a level golf course. This is an example of hitting that threshold, and all of a sudden we're just seeing constant degradation. So highly moisture saturated, you're seeing more and more ponds form, and you're seeing more of these polygons forming. And so Ben has very fancy toys, and we get to collect NDVI and this LiDAR imagery. We've also purchased different data sets for LiDAR, and then aerial imagery from satellites also to do some analysis. So here's an example of how we're putting all that together. This is a farm off Chena Hot Springs Road, cleared before 1950s. And you can see here, again, this is aerial imagery. So this would be from like old flyovers before satellites. And then we see continued development, continued clearing, continued plowing and grading as the farm's used. Again, aerial imagery from 2007. We're seeing more and more of this grading and use, and maybe a little bit of something going on here. And it looks like maybe they're not, like with these margins, they might not be using this part of the field as much. And then when we get to start using the more like high-tech data, so LiDAR, we can really start to see where some of this topography has really changed over time. Monitoring it through time, you can see more and more changes, more of those polygons forming. And then this is some of the modeling that Ben and his team do. They take these, overlay them, and then they're actually able to measure how much subsidence or how much those depressions have grown over time. So you can see these areas where you're getting over a meter change. So that's about 3 feet. About a meter change in part of these farms just since 2011 to 2017. So pretty dramatic. Okay, so that was remote sensing. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the agricultural studies and the work that we've been doing at some of the farms, and then at the Agriculture and Forestry Experiment Station where I'm located. Let's see, so this picture, I'm going to talk about the Great Mulch Study, and that's what this is. So here's the pretty picture of it. So yeah, here, I guess I'll go back so we can look at the pretty picture. So the Great Mulch Study is a combination effort. This is where my extension hat comes in as well as this project. So the Cooperative Extension has been responsible for collecting or conducting research to make usable information for our stakeholders. So that could be farmers, home gardeners, folks from across the state since our inception. It is also the goal of the Agriculture Forestry Experiment Stations. We do have a really nice publication on plastic mulch and different mulch uses for Alaska. However, there are some things about that are outdated. That was, I think, research done in the 80s and 90s. And there's a lot of these commercial products, so in terms of plastic mulches that are either no longer available or have changed quite a bit in time. And then we have new mulches that we might be interested in. So I've got 2 different biodegradable plastics. So one is a soy-based product and one is a enzymatically treated plastic product. And then we've got some biodegradable things like a pure cellulose. So we're looking at these new markets or relatively new markets in the Alaskan context. And then we're monitoring each one of these at multiple depths and soil moisture. So we're measuring at surface, 6 inches or the root zone, and then about a meter down, which would be considered like where we'd start to think about permafrost being affected. And then we have multiple replicates of these and with plants and without plants. So the reason it's the Great Mulch Study is because it's going on for a minimum of 3 years. We're looking at 22 different treatments plus a control, pure soil, and we've got about $30,000 worth of sensors in the ground. So it is great. And then some of the other things we're doing, we had much higher hopes or goals for doing on-farm crop trials at other farms that didn't quite come to fruition. Part of the reason is because Alaskan farms are typically small, they're highly diversified, and when we started working more with our producers, again, we're co-producing knowledge, it really wasn't feasible to use up a large portion of their farm for experiments. That's why we have the experiment station, but we did have some farmer collaborators like this farm here, where they were really interested in working with us in small scale in a small scale capacity for things to look at different crops that might help them reclaim part of their field. And so what I'm showing you here is a farm. So you can kind of see there's this hill and then there's this pond, or maybe you'll see it now that I'm pointing it out. And then this hill goes up and there's another pond back there. So this is an example. This was a level field 11 years before this photo was taken. It was cleared, it was level, it was about an acre. And this farmer has lost about 40% of their land that is productive because of this micro topography, it's not that micro, forming, and then these wetlands, low wetland areas that have formed. And they've also started to see a lot of weed pressure because of all this moisture. So they've got grasses and they've got wetland plants and they've got chickweed like crazy. So we're working with them, again, part of the mulch study, to understand what ground covers might be beneficial for weed suppression and not hopefully warming the soil too much more. So this is Typar, it's a breathable woven fabric. They can lift it up, they can reuse it, but it also doesn't trap the heat, especially with the trenches that are dug. And then we're looking at perennial crops, in this case asparagus, that might be able to help them reclaim this part of their farm because it is perennial, it doesn't require repeated tilling. Really, you can set it and then harvest it 5 years later. And then we're monitoring it we have a weather station that has nodes, so that we've got sensors at 3 different points throughout this throughout this plot. And this is a picture of our techs. You can see how mucky and muddy it is trying to put in those plots last year. So we will be monitoring this for the remainder of the project through 2027. And then this farm has been very generous and would like to keep the weather station and the sensors so that we can monitor it more long-term as well. So circle back in 5 years, we'll let you know how some of this is working, but we've got another farm that's interested in hardy perennial like fruit and berry bushes, which I think Heidi talked about some options earlier, but another example would be looking at currants and how those might be beneficial for an environment like this with cold, saturated soils. Did I cover? Oh yeah, and then we're also monitoring medium term. I won't call it long term because we don't have long term funding, but we're monitoring some farms that are new. They're doing land clearing, leveling, and different mitigation strategies, which I'll talk more about what that means in just a moment. And so again, more sensors in the field to monitor that. They're already doing the practices. We're working with them to help collect data on it so they can understand the outcomes of some of their farming activities, they being the farmers that we collaborate with. Here's another example of an agricultural study. So one of my primary hypotheses going into one of these farms that has a lot of that microtopography, we started looking around, and this particular farmer had a really beautiful compost pile, probably twice the size, like 2 of these tables put together and about 4 feet high. And then she started telling me how she moves it around different parts of the field. And all of a sudden we thought, like, wow, compost gets really hot. So this is after she turned the compost and watered it, and you can see these spikes in temperature. And sure enough, we mapped with her everywhere there was compost in her field for the last few years, and that's where she saw the biggest depressions forming. So these are the kinds of things that we can better understand how agricultural activities actually interact with the ground ice underneath, even if the folks aren't aware that it's there. I was just given the 5-minute mark, so I'm going to scoot through some of this. Mulch, no mulch, different canopy covers, and monitoring how these different crops with different canopy overlay, so creating basically a shading effect, actually work to either warm the soil significantly, even at the deeper temperatures, or cool the soil. So no mulch, bigger canopy creates that sort of seasonal canopy to help cool the soil. So there might actually be crop selections. If someone knows they have ice rich or some like permafrost on their farm, there might be some strategy to which crops folks select too. So we're starting to collect some of that data and get a better picture of that. So we were working, like I said, with 10 partner farms. I'm going to go through this pretty quick. There's a big social science component to this research, but also a co-learning. So we spend a lot of time with our farmer collaborators. Oops, sorry. Oh, that's fine. On their farms, we spend time with their families. We have spent time, I spent 2 days suckering tomatoes and taking notes and learning from the farmers about, you know, how much their high tunnel has subsided in like certain areas and what that might mean for not only their farm infrastructure, but also their production, and then how they've been managing that. So from them, we're learning mitigation strategies. We're learning about new research questions to consider, identification of environmental characteristics or heuristics that people are using to make decisions about what is happening on their farms potentially, changes in soil and environment, for example, and then local food system functions. So we're learning more about how these local farmers fit in with their food systems and how permafrost is affecting that. And then one of our researchers said from our farmers, they learned to consider new perspectives on old problems. So some takeaways. I think this is interesting. So I talked about ice poor and ice rich permafrost. And so here's an interesting from some of the surveys. So social data collection, survey taking. So this was just from a subset of our producers. And so in the farms that had ice poor, so there's one farmer who said, yes, now that I know what permafrost is, I'm ice poor, and we asked them to rate their perception of what risk is. And what we saw when asking this question is a pretty notable difference in those who are on ice poor permafrost felt like they had a pretty low rating of risk, and those who are on ice rich had a much higher perception of risk. So this just showing that like as farmers learn more about permafrost, they also learn how it might affect them. And this, we feel, is a really good thing, right? As our agriculture industry in Alaska grows, so too do things like, you know, awareness of and understanding of what the risks are associated with growing on permafrost, or better yet, buying land with permafrost, potentially. So here's some of the, things that we've learned so far in terms of interviewing or understanding from our producers how permafrost has affected them. This was a former peony farm. Again, it was level in 2007. Now they have permanent water bodies. So abandoning whole or full parts of the field, they removed all the peonies and transplanted them to a new piece of land. That means this farmer had to buy farmland twice, right? That is significant, especially when you consider the cost of land now. Changes to surface water, again, ponds, flowing water, problems with fencing. We see, again, another big infrastructure investment would be fencing. So people having to put in fences or maintain fences. Loss of topsoil. If you have to keep filling in a hole, you're losing all of that really good topsoil that maybe you've developed over 10 years as an organic farmer, let's say, and now it's under a hole and you've had to backfill it with like a, pretty nutrient poor or like less material. So like these are actually pretty big challenges when you consider what this means for areas in ice rich locations of the state when we're talking about agricultural development. Mitigation strategies, really quick. I know I'm about out of time, but here's an example of a hay farmer who's heavily managing their 80 acres of farmland. So there was an area that was subsiding. He dredged out, created a pond specifically for that, created a swale to a second pond, more swales to ponds, to an area of the field that has actually been abandoned. This was originally about 200-acre farm. They sold this to a waterfowl refuge, or put it in conservation, I should say. And so now they're moving the water into that area it naturally wants to go to try and keep parts of the farm active. And then they're continually grading and tilling, trying to thaw out more permafrost in areas that are having problems. The thing that's significant about this is producers like this are spending hundreds of thousands probably of dollars over the life of their farming activity to do this extensive management. And so this was a farm that was originally cleared in the 30s. And, here we are, 100 years later, and this is what it takes to like keep a portion. I think he said on the 80 acres, he's haying about 50 acres. So that's a significant loss. All right, I'm not going to go into this too much. Mostly I wanted to show you this picture. This is an example of a big old ice wedge. This is our university. Our offices are in here. So this is the backside of the University of Alaska Fairbanks. This is one example of an ice wedge. So you can kind of see that wedge activity. It has degraded probably from water runoff from this parking lot. And we've seen this collapse. And I think this thing has opened up several times. And so this is an example of like a pernicious problem that can just cause real problems for infrastructure. And again, I'm not going to go into this, but you can kind of read what people are doing about that. So some take-home messages: permafrost and agriculture interactions are different based on permafrost type. Like we talked about, ice rich, ice poor, and then what you do with it creates, question mark, different outcomes. From our producers, we've learned that most people with that medium to ice rich permafrost have between a 10 and 25% loss in production. That's really significant when you consider the bottom line of agriculture, economy, one's economy. And then disruptions to cost. So we talked about like how much it might cost both in time and money a producer to manage, like that heavy duty landscape scale managing activities. And then, my arguments in terms of where we're going with this, what we need, I think we really do need to develop permafrost conscious agricultural management strategies in Alaska. When we talked to these farmers, a lot of them said, yeah, I feel like I know what permafrost is. And we started to do more education, do more outreach, do more workshops. And all of a sudden they go, I did not know that this is what permafrost was or what it means when I mess with it. So I think in our agricultural community, especially as we have new land sales and new farmers coming to the state looking to start developing farms, especially on uncleared land or virgin land, we need to think really critically about what we're getting into, what we're developing. And I would argue that we already have a lot of really high quality farmland in parts of the state in that discontinuous or sporadic zone in the Mat-Su and southern part of the state. And if we want to see a thriving agricultural sector, we probably need to think really hard about what we're losing if we develop that and we keep moving agriculture north in the context of permafrost. So I will end there. I have some publications with me. There's more out on the Cooperative Extension table. We have some highlights and updates with just kind of recap of some of the data we've collected. It gets a little more in depth than I went today. We also have a demo at the Georgeson Botanical Garden in Fairbanks if you're ever up there. We have field days, websites, presentations like this. So if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. And here's a thanks to all of our collaborators. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Glenna. That was a really interesting presentation. Now you're going to hear about berries. Heidi Rader again, for those of you who were earlier in the talk about the Tribes Extension Program. Also on the AFPC board, and really happy to see you all here. So yeah, I'm going to talk about growing fruits and berries now. Who loves berries? Who loves fruit? Who is growing berries right now? Okay. And what about fruit? Okay. Great. Good to know. So I love berries. I grow berries. I grow a little bit of fruit. And would like to grow more. But yeah, so what I'll talk about today is just the main berry crops you can grow. I'm up in Fairbanks, traditional lands of the Dana people. And so my background is a little bit more on what grows well in the interior where we used to have cold winters. And but we do get some heat. So what grows well where I live is going to be different than what grows well where you live. But we do have lots of information, and I try to cover the varieties that grow well across Alaska as best as possible. So why grow berries? My focus on gardening has always been on the edible side. I do grow more and more flowers each year, but of course they're edible. They're perennial, so most of them. Strawberries we often grow as annuals, but most berry crops you plant them and then they come back the next year, which is really nice. Really high in antioxidants. And of course we can wild harvest berries, but sometimes, it's not such a great berry year, or Sometimes you have to go further than you would like. Sometimes you don't have time to do that. So I'll talk a little bit about stewarding wild berries as well. Okay, so they also have a lot of cultural significance. And of course, we've talked a lot about that earlier in our presentation. I find these charts kind of interesting depending on where you live. Your most important berry crop varies quite a bit. So down in Maritime, would anybody from this region here, Kodiak, is salmonberry your most important crop? What is blueberries? Okay, well that's high up there too. So yeah. And so it just varies across Alaska what the most important berry crop is. Where I'm from, it's blueberries. Close behind is lingonberries, and then raspberries as well. So, okay, so these are the kind of the top ones that you can cultivate. Blueberries, those might be the more difficult one depending on where you live. And so in interior Alaska, it's really going to be stewarding the wild lowbush blueberries. The half high does grow in Kenai, but I think it's a bit finicky. So these are the top crops that you can cultivate here in Alaska. And so we'll quickly talk about those. So most berry crops benefit from full sun, mulching, compost, weed control, plentiful pollinators, good drainage. But some do better in less ideal conditions like HASCAP. So we'll talk about that. But they do vary in their day and night requirements, as well as ideal pH, pruning regime, and fertility needs, as well as pollination strategies. So they're a little more complicated than growing veggies. You have to think about variety, pruning strategy, as well as your growing requirements. So some strawberries are going to survive as perennial, but some will do really well in annual production where you plant them each year under plastic, ideally. So, again, I wasn't going to talk a lot about my blog. It grows in Alaska and YouTube, but I'm kind of on a berry kick right now. So I'm doing blog posts and YouTube videos in order of my personal preference. So I talked about stewarding wild berries, strawberries, raspberries, moving on to currants, next HASCAPs, and then Saskatoon. So that's kind of my personal preference on the berry side of things. So this information you can find on my blog, and these talks will be recorded as well. So don't feel like you need to write all that down. Another interesting thing to think about too, for HASCAPs, for instance, you actually have to have self-incompatible plants. So you need two varieties, one so that they'll pollinate each other. Basically, you need those two varieties to be blooming at the same time, and they need to be self-incompatible. And so it's just funny things like that about berries. It's not quite as straightforward as planting lettuce or potatoes. Another thing you got to think about is dioecious plants. If you ever get cloudberries, those are pretty difficult to propagate in your backyard. But Emily, you've got some cloudberry plants growing. Oh. Okay, so cloudberries have a plant with a male flower and a plant with a female flower, and they need to be in proximity at the time that they're open for pollination for you to get cloudberries. So sometimes there are years where you really get very few cloudberries in a particular patch. And then daylight is a big influence on berries as well, particularly I would say with strawberries and raspberries. And so you find all of these different names to refer to the berries and their daylight response, basically. which can get a little confusing because it's not standardized. And so if you see in a seed catalog, they may call something June bearing, and it doesn't actually mean it will bear fruit in Alaska in June. So they're not super precise, but generally for strawberries, for instance, you want to look for day neutral strawberries is going to be a pretty good bet. And that just means that they will fruit in our short growing season with our long days because they're not triggered. Some varieties are not triggered to bear fruit until the nights are long enough. So same thing with raspberries. They also have a pretty significant daylight response. And so some of those varieties will not bear fruit in time. So growing fruit for profit, this is the Alaska Grown map, and just wanted to give a glimpse of what kind of, berry farms are out there that are selling berries. We have a very large, the Big M farm grows honeyberries as well as raspberries and strawberries sometimes. We had a pretty large strawberry farm a couple of years ago. And so it's just, that's a great place to go and see what grows well where you live. And also, of course, if you don't have space for your own berries, you might have a U-pick option nearby as well. You might also be able to get plants there too. So finding the right variety of berries is pretty tricky. It can be very expensive to purchase them on the internet and have them shipped, and it can be tricky to have them shipped up at the right time as well. So I'm not sure how I'm going to get through all of this, but I just finished a YouTube video on raspberries, and some of the varieties that do really well in Fairbanks are the Kiska and the Latham variety. Kiska is half wild and it will take over your yard, so you got to be careful with that. But there's some other varieties I'm trying. I tried Encore, Nova, and Prelude this year, and they were nice large berries, but some did not ripen by the end of the year. So that's the risk with growing some of these unknown varieties. But of course, Latham and Kiska are the main ones in interior. In southeast, south central, you have a lot. You have a lot more varieties to choose from, but they also need to do well in the rain and not get root rot too. So, raspberries, there are quite a few different pruning strategies. It's going to depend on if it's summer bearing versus fall bearing. So it's a biennial plant. And so what that means is for the floricane fruiting or the summer bearing variety, the cane will grow one year and not produce fruit, and then it'll produce fruit the following year. But with the fall bearing raspberries, it produces fruit on the primocane, and that's going to be the most productive way is if you cut down the floricanes and you can mow the raspberries down each year, which the new variety, I did plant one fall bearing variety and the moose did mow it down. So they did that work for me. So, but yeah, pruning, I don't know if anyone has an overgrown raspberry patch that doesn't produce any raspberries. One of those. Yeah. That's what happens if you don't prune. It will just kind of stop producing. So pruning is a important way to maintain your productivity of your patch. Nope. There's my slide on that. So okay. So in Fairbanks, there's a farmer. She has a U-pick. She grows Kiska. She said she got 100 gallons in a 700-foot row in her best year. So she does prune really vigorously, and this is a very vigorous variety. So that has a lot to do with it, I think. So that's kind of her strategy. Another thing to consider with raspberries too is I think some varieties are pretty tasteless. So I would test it out before you grew a large patch and see what you find the most tasty. Okay, so strawberries, I'm going to talk a lot about this one too. And then we do have a short demo. I think I'm going to run out of time, so I'll cruise ahead here. But the way I tend to grow strawberries is in plastic mulch with drip irrigation and a low tunnel. You do see people with a perennial patch with very tiny little berries, or some with larger berries if it's the quinault. And again, those patches tend to get overgrown with, and you may see them with no berries, and that's because they're not pruned. So you could till into those patches. That's called renovating the row, and then they will start to produce more too. So, but I tend to grow a day neutral variety of strawberry. They are heavy feeders. The plants are difficult to find. Here's the matted row. This is what happens if you don't renovate. So look for the everbearing or day neutral varieties. One of my favorites is Albion. Seascape is a good one too. Quinault has been a popular one over the years, and that one comes back year after year too. But expensive to bring up. So this was the strawberry farm in Two Rivers. His main variety that he used was Albion, and also Cabot, which was a June bearer. So sometimes June bearers do okay too. So he used the white mulch. I don't know if Glenn has studied that variety of mulch, but yeah. But he didn't get the production he wanted, and unfortunately, and he was mostly organic, but not entirely. And unfortunately, that operation did not make it. Currants and gooseberries. We have a currant festival in Fairbanks that Glenna helps run every year. And I'm passing around some information about propagating currants and gooseberries, because that is always one of the issues, is getting those plants. And so currants is, I guess, my third or fourth favorite berry. Love currants. I make a syrup with high bush cranberries and currants and rose hips and put that on granola every day. So I like those. Lots of different varieties of currants. You can eat them raw with the seeds, but a lot of times you strain them out, especially the black currants. Is that correct? Yeah. I don't know. Lots of different varieties, and there are native varieties of currants as well. And but the non-native varieties are tending to be probably the tastier ones, larger berries and things too. So Saskatoon or service berries, I mean, they grow to be tall bushes, large berries. You can pick a couple gallons in like an hour. Super productive. Not my top favorite berry, but it's a fun one to have around. And you do have to prune them, of course. Sometimes they get infested by sawflies pretty heavily, and so they can eat all the crops. And as with all these berries, you also have to watch out for the birds. They can be an issue, particularly honeyberries, but I would say Saskatoons too. Honeyberries. Anybody growing honeyberries? Heard of these? Yeah. Do you like them? Happy with them? Yeah. I'm trying to love them. I don't love them yet, but I want to love them because they grow really well. They also will not take over your yard, which is a good thing. And they're like the earliest crop of berries as well. So they come in a lot of different tastes and a lot of different shapes too. So that's kind of fun. And highly productive. So they are fruit and we should grow them. They are a berry. I do love all berries at some level. So This is one, again, where you do need those two different varieties that will pollinate each other. And if they're equally, sometimes you grow a variety just to be the pollinator, and then you can minimize the number of plants that you're growing for that variety. Otherwise, you can grow them in equal amounts if the pollinator variety is equally as tasty. And a lot of these have come over from the University of Saskatchewan, the varieties that we grow here. Some good ones to look for are the Boreal series, which should be on that slide, but I don't know what happened there. And just quickly, I want to talk about stewarding wild berries, blueberries in particular. The half-high does do okay in some parts of Alaska, but in the interior, our low bush blueberry is probably the best bet for growing blueberries. And if you already have them on your land, things you can do are simply, cut down your spruce and birch that are growing up. You can prune the berries just like you would a variety you planted yourself, weed out the invasive species, and you can really improve your backyard patch. This is a bush in my backyard, my former backyard, unfortunately. And I pruned these berries and it made them much easier to harvest and much more productive. So I just took hedging shears and did a real rough job. Roughly 1/3 of the plant, because you kind of want to maintain your production over time, but it was pretty haphazard. So Emily Becker offered to do a demo. Josh Smith has a nursery where he propagates and sells a lot of native plants and non-native berry fruit trees. And he has a method of using a blender to extract the seeds. And so we're gonna, yeah.
Thank you. And Myra's mom, is it Wanda? We didn't want to bring in like wild blueberries from other places, so she very generously donated some of her harvest of Kodiak blueberries. I don't know, do you happen to know what species they are? Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to key it out, but we do have some plant scientists here. But yeah, so that would be great. So Josh has pioneered this method, and our Rural Cap Grow YouTube page has a couple videos with Josh if you want to go back and listen to him talk. So yeah, you take the blueberries, add a bunch of water, and then you blend it for like 10 to 20 seconds. So you're extracting the seeds, and I'm assuming that you are also scarifying them, roughing up that seed coat a little bit to get it prepped. Yep. So he says 10 to 20 seconds, which like I'm always afraid, like, that seems like a long time, but you just do it and yep. I know
Is it possible to rotate the camera?
And then pour off the water. So you're basically, let it settle a little. Yeah, I guess, yeah, you have to tip it upside down. Let it settle a little bit. And then we're going to pour off that water and do it again. Yeah. So you do this, and then you put them in the fridge overnight, soaking in water. So you soak them in water for a day, and then you put them in some peat moss, and you put them in the fridge for 90 days. So basically you put it in the fridge and you forget about it. I was texting him. I was like, really, 90? Could you do 60 or 30? And he said he hasn't done any real experiments, but here, let's go ahead and pour off that water. Yeah. And can you can sort of see the seed settling on the bottom? Yep, pour it all off. Yeah, you can see him down there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's good juice to save. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then do it again. Yeah, you add more water. Mm-hmm. So he was telling me one time so these berries have been in the freezer for a year, and I was like, is that enough? Like, do you really have to put them back in the fridge? And he said he took berries that had been frozen, he did the blender method, and then put them immediately in the peat moss and put them under lights, and he only got a few to germinate, but the rest of them he put in the fridge and left them there for 3 months, and then he had like, hundreds of plants. So they really do need that cold stratification. All right, so they're back in the blender. Yeah, I think that's good. Pour it off, yeah. We may need some more water. We may want to do it again. There's like a little pitcher next to that sink right over there. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry. Yes. It's for a lot of wild berries. Salmon berries, cloudberries have to be fermented first. So that's where you take your berries and you leave them on the counter in a plastic bag for like until they, start moldering. And then you do this and you put them in the fridge. And we have Josh's handouts. They're linked online. Maybe we can pull that up later. I can show you. Yeah.
I think I'm coming up close on time, so I was just going to say I don't think I'm going to get to fruit today, but I just interviewed the Mastermans up in Fairbanks, and there's an article on my blog about the varieties they're growing up there, as well as around the state, some other fruit growers around the state. And then Marisa passed out the Propagating Currants and Gooseberries publication and a survey about demographics, if you wouldn't mind filling that out and leaving it up on the table.
I think this is looking good. Cool. Maybe one more time.
Okay.
And I know we have a break right after this, or if you need to leave. So I should go over here, or it's okay. Okay. Well, I don't think he's done this on cam. It's not on camera, but he talks about it. And I mean, really, you can read the directions. It's not terribly hard, but I do find like you got to see it. Yeah, you're basically pouring off the juice in the water and you're left with the seeds. Yeah. And I'm assuming you're like beating up the seed coat a little bit. I don't know, maybe you could tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, it's exactly as she said. You're just scarifying that seed, kind of breaking down the seed coat so you have a quicker germination period. Yeah.
This looks awesome. We could pass this around. So, and Wanda's going to take those home. Yeah, so you're going to leave it soaking in water overnight, and then put it in the peat moss in the fridge for 90 days, or I mean, I think you could probably, I was thinking about that because it's like almost April 1st. Like, seems like maybe take some out on the end of May, like June 1st. Like, that's April, May. That's 60 days. That's all, Come on. Right. You could. Yeah. And of course, there's hundreds of seeds in there. So. No, just that peat moss. You could bring it out and put it under, maybe in a tray, put it under lights, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and thank you, Wanda, for the berries, and I think Max for the blender, and yeah, everybody for helping with that. So, yeah, get some seeds going in propagation. So I think we're about at time. So I'll save a little time for questions if anyone has it. Yeah. Should be a mic somewhere.
Testing. You said Albion is your favorite strawberry variety?
I think so.
And day neutral means it is not affected by our long photo period.
Exactly.
Is Albion a perennial?
So that's a good question. Strawberries are perennials, but they may or may not survive the winter in Alaska. So they may not come back the next year, or they may come back and they just won't be as productive. So that's why we tend to grow them as annuals.
Oh, what are productive annual or perennial day neutral varieties that you recommend?
Well, Quinault is one of the popular ones that comes back. Actually, Fort Laramie, I think, is also a potential one. And it's going to depend on where you live as well. So anybody have a variety down southeast, this area that comes back?
Oh, it does? Cool.
It comes back in Anchorage, Albion.
Yeah. Okay. And they will, and they'll survive in my garden. They just won't always be as productive the next year. So, yeah. Oh, good to know. Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all.